The California sun painted golden streaks across the cracked sidewalks of Wilmington as 9-year-old Mike Tyson clutched her sketch pad close to her chest. Her art class had run longer than usual, but she didn't mind. Miss Rivera had shown them how to capture light in their drawings, and Aaliyah's flower sketch seemed to glow on the paper. The community center buzzed behind her as she stepped onto the familiar street that led home. "I can walk myself," she had insisted when Miss Rivera offered to accompany her. "It's only 4 blocks. Those 4 blocks stretched ahead like any other Sunday afternoon walk. Quiet houses lined the street, their windows reflecting the lazy warmth of the day. Aaliyah took small bites from her green apple, savoring the tartness, while her mind wandered to the drawing tucked safely under her arm. 2 blocks from home, everything changed. The black and white police cruiser appeared beside her like a predator stalking prey. Its engine purred with mechanical menace as it rolled slowly, matching her walking pace. Aaliyah's heart quickened, but she remembered her father's teachings. Be polite. Be respectful. Keep walking. Don't run. The window descended with electric precision. Officer Ray Dunnan leaned out, his face hidden behind reflective sunglasses that turned his eyes into mirrors of indifference. His voice carried the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You lost, sweetheart." Aaliyah stopped walking. Her small fingers tightened around her sketch pad as she forced a smile that felt strange on her lips. "No, sir. I live right down that street." Dunnan's head tilted slightly, skepticism dripping from his voice like poison. "You live here? What's your address?" She pointed toward the row of houses ahead, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. "4th house on the left, the one with the green mailbox." "You got ID?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Aaliyah blinked, confusion replacing her carefully maintained politeness. "I'm 9, sir. I don't have ID." Dunnan clicked his tongue, a sound that seemed to echo with disapproval and something darker. The car door opened with deliberate slowness. His black boot hit the pavement with the weight of authority, the sound reverberating through the quiet neighborhood like a warning bell that no one else could hear. He stood before her now, a wall of uniform and badge that blocked out the sun. His shadow fell across her small frame, and Aaliyah instinctively stepped back. Her apple rolled from her fingers, forgotten. "Where are your parents?" His voice had grown sharper, more demanding. "At home. I just came from art class. Miss Rivera runs it at the community center." Each word came out carefully measured, the way her father had taught her to speak to officers. "Don't get smart with me," Dunnan snapped, his tone cutting through her attempt at respectful explanation. "That's what's wrong with your kind. Always talking back, even when you're caught." Aaliyah's world tilted. Caught? Caught doing what? Walking home? Carrying her art supplies? Being 9 years old on a Sunday afternoon? "I'm not talking back, sir. I'm just answering your questions." But her words only seemed to fuel his anger. In one swift motion, Dunnan lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron-tight, meant for criminals and grown men, not for the delicate bones of a child. "Hey!" Aaliyah cried out, panic flooding her voice. Her sketch pad slipped from under her arm, falling open on the concrete. The flower she had drawn so carefully that afternoon scattered in the breeze, its petals now trampled under the officer's boot. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, the words barely audible through her rising terror. Dunnan's grip tightened, and he twisted her wrist with deliberate cruelty. "You've got a mouth on you. Maybe this will teach you some respect." The crack that followed split the quiet afternoon like thunder. Aaliyah's scream tore from her lungs as her small body crumpled to the concrete, her left arm bent at an angle that defied nature. Pain exploded through her consciousness, white-hot and overwhelming. "I didn't do anything," she gasped through tears that came in waves. "I didn't do anything." Dunnan stood over her broken form, breathing heavily, his hand resting on his belt with casual indifference. Behind his reflective sunglasses, his face remained emotionless, as if breaking a child's arm was simply another part of his afternoon routine. "Maybe next time you'll learn some respect," he muttered, already reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. But what Officer Ray Dunnan didn't know, what would later become the thread that unraveled his entire world, was at the moment his hands touched Aaliyah. She had pressed the emergency shortcut on her phone. It was a feature her father had drilled into her memory. If anything ever feels wrong, press this button. The call connected instantly to Lauren Tyson, Mike Tyson's longtime security coordinator, former Marine, and Aaliyah's fiercely protective aunt. The phone, now clutched in Aaliyah's uninjured hand, captured every sound, every cruel word, every sob, every crack of bone breaking under the weight of unchecked authority. 23 minutes and 14 seconds of audio that would soon shake the foundations of power itself. Lauren Tyson's gym bag hit the floor with a metallic crash that echoed through her apartment. The emergency alert on her phone had activated automatically, but she didn't need to hear the words to know something was catastrophically wrong. The sound of Aaliyah's terrified voice cut through the line, like a blade through silence. She was already moving before conscious thought took over. Hoodie pulled over her shoulders, car keys in hand, engine roaring to life. Every second of her Marine training kicked in as she navigated the streets with surgical precision. Her phone mounted on the dashboard, the open line still carrying sounds that would haunt her forever. The emergency room at Wilmington General was a symphony of controlled chaos. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency between curtained areas, their voices carrying the urgent undertones of people accustomed to trauma. But when a police cruiser screeched to a halt outside the automatic doors and deposited a small, broken child before speeding away without explanation, the entire rhythm of the hospital stuttered. "What happened to her?" demanded Dr. Sarah Chun, rushing toward the stretcher where Aaliyah lay pale and trembling. The EMT, who had responded to the anonymous call, shook his head grimly. "Police brought her. Said she fell. No report, no paperwork, no details. Just dropped her and left." "Fell." Nurse Patricia Williams's voice rose an octave. "Her arm is shattered. This isn't a playground accident." Aaliyah drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain too overwhelming for her young nervous system to process. Her lips moved constantly, repeating the same phrase like a prayer or a plea. "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." It was Patricia who noticed something crucial. Aaliyah's right hand was clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. When Patricia gently pried the small fingers open, she discovered a phone with an active call that had been running for 23 minutes and counting. "She called someone," Patricia whispered to Dr. Chun. "The line's still open." 30 blocks away, Lauren's car jumped the curb in front of the hospital entrance. She burst through the automatic doors like a force of nature, scanning faces until she locked eyes with the reception nurse. "Aaliyah Tyson, 9 years old. Broken arm. I'm her emergency contact." "Room 12, came the reply, and Lauren was already running. The sight that greeted her would fuel her rage for months to come. Aaliyah looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her dark skin pale with shock, her eyes distant and unfocused. The temporary brace on her arm looked designed for someone 3 times her size. "Auntie," Aaliyah whispered as Lauren knelt beside the bed. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm here." The tears came then, along with words that Lauren would never forget. "He grabbed me. I told him my name. I told him who my daddy is, and he laughed." Lauren's blood turned to ice. "You told him you're Mike Tyson's daughter?" "He laughed at me, Eddie. He laughed." The full horror of the situation crystallized in Lauren's mind. This wasn't ignorance or fear. This wasn't even garden-variety police brutality. This was deliberate cruelty from someone who knew exactly whose child he was breaking and simply didn't care. Lauren stood slowly, her jaw set with military precision. She pulled out her phone and opened the audio recording from the emergency call. Her finger hovered over the play button for just a moment before she pressed it. Aaliyah's voice filled the hospital room, tiny and terrified. "Please stop. That hurts. I didn't do anything." Then came the sound that would echo in Lauren's nightmares, the distinct crack of a child's bone breaking under adult hands. A doctor in the doorway stopped mid-step. A nurse's hand flew to her mouth. A paramedic turned his face away, unable to listen. "My God," someone whispered. "Do we know who did this?" Lauren's voice was deadly calm. "I'm about to find out." She walked out of that hospital room and into war. The first call went to Sergeant Linda Brooks in Internal Affairs. "It's Lauren Tyson. I need a favor, and I need it now." "What happened?" "A cop broke a 9-year-old girl's arm, didn't log the stop, didn't report the injury, and dumped her at the ER like garbage." Lauren paused for effect. "Linda, she's Mike's daughter." The silence on the line stretched for 5 seconds before Linda spoke again. "Send me everything you have." Within 10 minutes, Lauren had her answer. "Patrol Unit 73D. Officer Ray Dunnan. Unauthorized vehicle use. 3 prior complaints, all mysteriously dismissed." She zoomed in on his personnel photo. The same sunglasses, the same face that had terrorized a child just hours before. Lauren knew cops had patterns, and Dunnan's was predictable. Every Sunday, same time, same booth at Benny's Grill. She didn't tell Mike. She didn't call the press. She didn't notify the authorities. She just drove. The parking lot of Benny's Grill was half empty when Lauren arrived. Inside, the weekend crowd enjoyed their chicken fried steak and sweet tea, unaware that their peaceful Sunday was about to be shattered. Lauren parked across the street and waited with the patience of a sniper. 15 minutes later, Ray Dunnan swaggered out of his personal vehicle, sunglasses still perched on his face like a mask of invincibility. He nodded at the waitress with a grin, completely oblivious to the reckoning walking through the door behind him. The bell above the diner entrance jingled softly as Lauren entered. Conversations continued. Forks clinked against plates. Dunnan looked up from his menu with casual annoyance. "You lost, ma'am." Lauren didn't respond with words. She pulled out her phone, found the audio file, and pressed play. Aaliyah's voice echoed through the suddenly silent diner. "Please stop. That hurts. I didn't do anything." The crack of her arm breaking silenced every conversation in the restaurant. The diner fell into the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Forks clattered to plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen staff peered through the service window as Aaliyah's recorded voice continued to fill the space with her pain and terror. Ray Dunnan's face drained of color as the audio played. His menu trembled at his hands, and for the first time since Lauren had entered, his swagger completely evaporated. The sunglasses that had hidden his eyes during the assault couldn't conceal his panic now. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, standing abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Lauren's voice was steady as winter rain. "You know who that little girl is." "Doesn't matter," Dunnan snapped, but his voice cracked on the words. "She resisted arrest. She was being disrespectful. She's Mike Tyson's daughter," Lauren said with surgical precision. The effect was instantaneous. Dunnan's face went from pale to gray. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The smirk that had been his constant companion throughout his career vanished completely. "And I'm Lauren Tyson," she continued, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. "His sister." "You threatening me?" Dunnan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lauren leaned forward across the table, her presence filling his personal space with controlled menace. "If I were threatening you, you'd already be on the floor." She slid a napkin across the table toward him. Written in block letters were the words, "Room 12, Wilmington General. 9 years old. Broken arm. Audio evidence. Witnesses." Internal Affairs file opened. By now, half the diner was watching in shocked silence. Phones were discreetly recording. The waitress stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hand, afraid to move or speak. "I suggest you think very carefully about your next 24 hours, Lauren said, standing slowly. "Because every second of audio I have shows exactly what kind of coward hides behind a badge." Dunnan tried to salvage some dignity, falling back on the institutional arrogance that had protected him for years. "You people think you can." The table shook as Lauren slammed her hands down on its surface. Coffee mugs rattled. A few drops of liquid splashed onto the napkin. "What you did wasn't police work," she said, her voice cutting through his attempted bluster. "It wasn't fear or confusion or split-second decision-making. It was the deliberate torture of a child. And not just any child, our child." She straightened, towering over his hunched form. "Now I'm going to break your career the same way you broke her arm. Slowly, deliberately, and with the whole world watching. Lauren turned and walked toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. Without looking back, she delivered her final words. "The next time I see you in uniform, I hope it's during your perp walk." The door closed behind her with a gentle chime that sounded like a death knell. Back in her car, Lauren's phone buzzed with a text from Linda Brooks. "We got him on record. Dispatch confirms he wasn't on shift. Took the patrol car without authorization. EMTs confirmed the hospital drop-off. He's dirty on multiple counts." Lauren stared through her windshield at the diner, where she could see Denon still sitting at his table, shaking visibly. "Where is he now?" she texted back. "Still at the diner, I assume. You didn't do anything reckless, did you?" "I didn't touch him," Lauren replied. "Not yet." That evening, Lauren made a decision that would change everything. She uploaded the audio from Aaliyah's emergency call to a whistleblower platform anonymously. No context, no explanation. Just 23 minutes and 14 seconds of a child being tortured by someone sworn to protect her. The platform servers began straining under the weight of traffic within hours. Comments poured in from around the world. "I'm shaking. That poor baby. Name this cop." This is what they do when they think nobody's watching. By midnight, hashtags were trending globally. Hashtag justice for Aaliyah. Hashtag he touched the wrong girl. Hashtag Tyson's daughter. The audio spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Celebrities reposted it. Activists called for immediate action. News outlets began running the story on loop. Some users, unaware of Aaliyah's identity, simply reacted to the raw horror of hearing a child's arm being broken. But when her name was finally revealed, Aaliyah Tyson, adoptive daughter of boxing legend Mike Tyson, the internet exploded with righteous fury. This wasn't just another case of police brutality. This was personal. This was a family that had the resources, the connections, and the will to fight back. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Officer Ray Dunan's social media accounts had vanished. His phone was disconnected. He failed to report for his scheduled shift, but it was already too late to hide. 2 news vans were parked outside his house. A drone circled his backyard. Neighbors were giving interviews to anyone with a microphone. Inside the Wilmington Police Department, the atmosphere had curdled like milk left in the sun. No one defended Dunan. Not this time. Not after that recording. Officers who had worked alongside him for years suddenly discovered urgent paperwork that required their immediate attention. Others simply called in sick. The wall of blue silence that had protected countless bad cops for decades crumbled in the face of a little girl's voice. Back at the hospital, Lauren sat beside Aaliyah's bed as nurses rotated in and out, each one stopping to sign her cast with messages of support. "You're brave. You matter. Justice is coming." Aaliyah looked up at her aunt with eyes that seemed older than her 10 years. "Is he going to hurt someone else?" Lauren paused, choosing her words carefully. "No, baby girl. Because you were brave enough to press that button, and now the whole world knows what he did." Aaliyah closed her eyes and drifted toward sleep, her breathing finally steady for the first time since the assault. Lauren stood quietly and walked to the window, looking out at the crowd that had begun to gather in the hospital parking lot. Signs and candles were visible even from the 4th floor. The night air in Wilmington had changed. The streets weren't just restless, they were furious. And Lauren knew this was only the beginning. The crowd outside Wilmington Police Department swelled like a rising tide. By dawn, over 3,000 people had gathered, their voices creating a wall of sound that penetrated every window of the precinct. Parents held their children close while pointing at signs that read, "Protect our kids," and "Aaliyah deserves justice." College students who had organized overnight walkouts stood alongside grandmothers who remembered their own encounters with police brutality. The demographics were irrelevant. The audio recording had united them in shared outrage. Inside the precinct, phones rang continuously. Officers ducked into break rooms to avoid the media circus brewing outside. The young officer manning the reception desk stood rigid behind bulletproof glass, watching the crowd through windows that seemed increasingly fragile with each passing hour. Lauren Tyson stood at the heart of the demonstration, not as its leader, but as its catalyst. She had lit the match, and now the fire belonged to the people. Her phone buzzed with another update from Linda Brooks. They've frozen Dunan's pay and flagged his badge. He's under full review for excessive force. Not enough, Lauren replied tersely. The system was offering symbolic gestures, while hoping the fury would burn itself out. The pressure mounted from every direction. News stations played the audio recording on continuous loops. Radio talk show hosts broke down crying on air. International media picked up the story. Hashtag Justice for Aaliyah dominated social media platforms in 7 languages. The story had transcended local news to become a global symbol of institutional failure. But the system had spent decades learning how to fight back against public outrage, and at 6:03 the following morning, it deployed its most effective weapon, retaliation. Lauren stepped outside her apartment for a usual morning run, barely making it to the sidewalk before a gray unmarked sedan screeched to a halt beside her. 3 men in plain clothes emerged with military efficiency. One flashed a badge, so quickly it might have been a business card. Lauren Tyson, you're under temporary detainment for obstruction and aggravated assault on a peace officer. Before she could speak, they grabbed her arms and yanked them behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut with mechanical precision. No Miranda rights. No phone call. No explanation beyond the flimsy charges that wouldn't hold up under basic legal scrutiny. Neighbors peered through windows as Lauren was forced into the sedan. Mrs. Patterson from next door whispered to her husband, "That's her. That's the one who helped that little girl." Someone was already filming from an apartment balcony. The footage hit social media within minutes, adding fuel to a fire that was already threatening to consume everything in its path. At 6:44, Mike Tyson was in the middle of a business call when Linda Brooks phoned with news of Lauren's arrest. "You didn't warn her this was coming," Mike said, his voice carrying the controlled fury that had once terrified opponents in boxing rings around the world. "I didn't know," Linda replied quickly. "They bypassed internal channels completely. This is pure retaliation. I want every name involved," Mike said with deadly calm. "Every badge number, every signature, every home address." He hung up without waiting for a response. Mike Tyson was done talking. Lauren sat in a cement-holding cell designed to break spirits through pure psychological pressure. The walls were gray. The light was harsh fluorescent. A guard had handed her a clipboard with a typed statement demanding she cease all involvement in ongoing investigations of law enforcement misconduct. She read it once, then tore it in half and dropped the pieces on the floor. "You think I'm scared of paper?" she muttered. On the other side of the reinforced glass, a man in an expensive blazer sneered at her defiance. "You're making noise this department doesn't want, Miss Tyson." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Good." At 8:02, the cell door swung open with a screech that echoed through the detention area. Mike Tyson walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys, a federal agent from the Department of Civil Rights, and a cameraman documenting every second. Mike didn't say a word. He simply handed a flash drive to the federal agent. The drive contained surveillance footage of Lauren's unlawful arrest, dashcam video from the confrontation at Benny's Grill, medical credentials confirming Lauren's legal authority as an emergency responder, and documentation proving she had every right to intervene on behalf of Aaliyah. The federal agent examined the credentials, nodded once, and spoke with absolute authority. "She's leaving with us." Now, Lauren stood slowly, her wrists bearing red marks from the handcuffs. Her eyes burned with the kind of fury that had been building for days, but her voice remained steady. "How many others are sitting in cells right now for asking the wrong questions?" Outside the detention center, a crowd of reporters and protesters had materialized as if summoned by divine intervention. Mike took the microphone from a news producer and spoke directly into the cameras. "They tried to silence the woman who protected my daughter," he said, his words carrying across the crowd and into millions of homes via live television. "Now they're going to learn what happens when you come after my family twice." That evening, Lauren and Mike held a town hall meeting at Wilmington High School. The gymnasium, designed to hold 400 people, somehow accommodated over 600. They sat in aisles, stood along walls, and filled the stage behind the speakers. What happened next transformed a local incident into a national reckoning. A mother stepped forward with trembling hands and took the microphone. "My son was thrown face first into a squad car because he looked like someone," she said, her voice shaking with years of suppressed pain. No apology. No report filed. We were told to be grateful he wasn't shot. A teenage boy raised his phone, showing a photo of his younger brother's bruised face. "This is my brother after a routine stop. He was 14 years old and walking to the library." A retired police officer, his badge still visible in his wallet, took the microphone with hands that shook with emotion. "I tried to report my partner 3 times for excessive force. Internal Affairs told me to retire quietly or face retaliation." Each testimony was like a wound torn open and exposed to light for the first time. Lauren stood in the center of it all, listening, absorbing, promising action. "We're building a federal case," she announced as the evening wound down. "And when we're finished, every name, every badge, every sealed file they tried to hide, it's all coming out." That night, their website went live, tysonjustice.org. By sunrise, it had received 18,000 verified submissions from across the nation. The war had begun in earnest. The courthouse steps were packed with humanity, a sea of faces representing every demographic, every background, every community that had ever suffered under the weight of unchecked authority. They had come from across the country to witness something unprecedented, a child's voice bringing down a system built on silence. Los Angeles County Superior Court had never seen anything like it. The line to enter wrapped around 3 city blocks. Security guards checked identification with unusual thoroughness, aware that the entire nation was watching. Inside, every seat had been claimed before the doors officially opened. On the prosecution side, Lauren Tyson sat with military posture, a slim black notebook in her lap, containing names, dates, and evidence that would reshape how America viewed police accountability. Beside her, Mike Tyson filled his chair like a coiled spring, his presence radiating controlled power. And between them sat Aaliyah Tyson, dressed in soft blue, her left arm still bearing the cast that had become a symbol of institutional failure. Across the courtroom, Officer Ray Dunnan looked like a ghost of his former self. Gone were the sunglasses that had hidden his cruelty. Gone was the swagger that had carried him through years of abuse. He hunched behind the defense table, flanked by attorneys who avoided eye contact with both their client and the gallery. Judge Patricia Williams entered, and 600 people rose in unison. The weight of their collective expectation seemed to press against the walls themselves. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state of California will prove that Officer Raymond Dunnan knowingly and violently assaulted a minor, failed to report the incident, attempted to destroy evidence, and conspired to suppress witness testimony." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The jury, 12 citizens who had somehow avoided exposure to the viral audio, listened with growing horror as the first piece of evidence filled the courtroom. Aaliyah's voice rang out from the speakers. "Please, I didn't do anything. Please stop. That hurts." The crack that followed silenced everything. A juror's hand flew to her mouth. The judge himself flinched and shifted in his seat. In the gallery, several people began crying openly. The medical evidence came next. X-rays of Aaliyah's fractured ulna displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. Doctors' reports detailing the force required to produce such damage in a healthy child's arm. Photographs of bruising patterns that told the story of adult hands gripping a small wrist with deliberate cruelty. EMT testimony followed, precise and devastating. The nurse who found Aaliyah clutching her phone in the emergency room described the child's condition upon arrival. Hospital security footage showed the patrol car speeding away after dumping its victim like garbage. Each piece of evidence was another nail in Dunnan's coffin, but the prosecution was building toward something larger than one man's crimes. When Lauren took the stand, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Her voice was steady, unemotional, and precise as she recounted every detail of that terrible day. From the emergency alert that sent her racing across the city to the confrontation at Benny's Grill, she laid out a systematic pattern of abuse and cover-up. "I confronted Officer Dunnan because I believed, and the evidence proves, that he thought no one would ever hold him accountable for torturing a child. she said, looking directly at the jury. I was wrong. He didn't think no one would hold him accountable. He knew someone would, and he simply didn't care. The defense attorney objected. Judge Williams overruled. Lauren continued, detailing the threats against her family, the attempted intimidation, the illegal arrest designed to silence her voice. I wasn't the first person to report abuse by Officer Dunnan, she said. I was just the first one who refused to disappear quietly when they applied pressure. The next wave of witnesses demolished any remaining pretense of Dunnan's innocence. A retired lieutenant admitted that complaints against Dunnan had been regularly buried to avoid departmental embarrassment. A social worker revealed 2 previous reports involving Dunnan and children, both mysteriously dismissed without investigation. Most damaging of all was testimony from Officer Marcus Chun, who appeared under subpoena and federal immunity. He described a culture of impunity within the department, where excessive force was ignored as long as it didn't generate paperwork. Dunnan once told me that you have to show them who's boss while they're still young. Chin testified, his voice barely audible. He specifically said that about minority children. When the prosecution rested, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. No cross-examination could erase what had been documented so thoroughly. Then it was Aaliyah's turn to speak. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she approached the witness stand, her small shoes silent against the hardwood floor. A bailiff helped her climb into the seat and adjusted the microphone to her height. Judge Williams looked down with unusual gentleness. Do you understand why you're here today, Miss Tyson? Aaliyah nodded, her voice small but clear. He asked me for ID, but I'm only 10. I told him my name. I told him my daddy's name. She paused, gathering courage. He laughed. For the first time since entering the courthouse, she looked directly at Ray Dunnan. Then he grabbed me and twisted my arm until I heard it break. The courtroom was absolutely silent. You could hear people breathing. Aaliyah reached into her small backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She opened it carefully, revealing a drawing she had made during her recovery. It showed a little girl with a cast on her arm, standing in front of a crowd. Below the image, in careful block letters, she had written, "I'm stronger now." She held the drawing up with both hands, and without instruction or prompting, the entire gallery rose to their feet. It was a silent wave of respect, honor, and barely contained fury that seemed to lift the courtroom's very foundations. Aaliyah looked toward Lauren, who nodded through tears streaming down her face. Even Mike Tyson's hardened expression cracked as he lowered his head and wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. Ray Dunnan never looked up again. After 8 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 6 hours and 11 minutes. At 4:11 in the afternoon, the foreperson stood with a voice that carried across the packed courtroom and into history. We, the jury, find the defendant Raymond Dunnan guilty on the charge of aggravated assault on a minor, guilty on the charge of abuse of authority, guilty on the charge of attempted obstruction of justice. Dunnan did not speak. He did not cry. He did not apologize. As the bailiff cuffed his hands behind his back, dozens of phones recorded the moment. Dozens more hands applauded. Outside, the crowd of thousands erupted in celebration that could be heard for blocks. Lauren, Mike, and Aaliyah exited through the courthouse's front doors, flanked by their legal team. Reporters screamed questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. But they didn't stop until one voice called out above the chaos. "Mr. Tyson, what happens now?" Mike paused, turned toward the crowd, and spoke words that would define the next chapter of American civil rights. We built something that doesn't need a Tyson name to be heard. 3 weeks later, the Tyson family wasn't celebrating. They were organizing. The conviction of one officer was justice for Aaliyah, but they had uncovered evidence of systemic corruption that demanded systematic response. The Foundation for Institutional Safety and Truth launched with offices in 12 states. Within the first month, they received over 31,000 verified reports of police misconduct. Retired detectives, civil rights attorneys, digital forensic specialists, and trauma counselors mobilized under one mission: expose the system, protect the silenced, and return power to the people. The pushback was immediate and vicious. Legal challenges, cyber attacks, death threats, and attempts to discredit the Foundation's work came from every direction. But they had something their opponents didn't expect. The voice of a little girl who had refused to stay quiet, and a family with the resources and determination to amplify that voice until it echoed across the world. Standing before reporters at the Foundation's first national conference, Aaliyah Tyson took the microphone in both small hands. At 10 years old, she had become the face of a movement she never asked to lead. "My name is Aaliyah Tyson," she said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium and into millions of homes via live television. "A man broke my arm and tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. But I do belong. And so does every kid whose voice has never been heard." She held up one final drawing, a girl holding a megaphone, surrounded by other children of every color and background. Below it, in careful letters, "Our voices matter." The revolution had begun with a child's scream. It would be won with her voice.